This is We Bleed Orange and Black, the podcast for Halloween and horror lovers. Join us as we interview creators, discuss our favorite horror, and share original spooky stories. I'm Jeff C. Carter, and this week we're talking with R.A. Busby about her new book, Words Made of Flesh. R.A. Busby is the winner of the 2020 Shirley Jackson Award for Short Fiction, and her work appears in several anthologies, magazines, and podcasts, including Pseudopod, Creepy, and Tales to Terrify. Last year, she published her first novel, Corporate Body, with My Dark Library. When not writing stories to scare you, R.A. goes running in the desert with her dog. Welcome to the show, R.A.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on.
So I have an icebreaker question for you. In the afterword for your book, you mentioned that you learned calligraphy.
I did. Yes, it was a painstaking process.
Okay, I'm fascinated. Tell me everything.
Okay. Well, I have a lot of friends who are in the SCA, the Society for Creative Anachronism, but I was really more interested in the crafts more than the persona or the fighting or elements that appeal to many people who like cosplay, etc. And I actually found a wonderful calligrapher through the SCA in outside of Chicago who was into medieval calligraphy, which was especially interesting. And I mentioned in the afterword, and he was one of those folks who just knows his stuff inside and out, and especially things like preparing vellum, styles of medieval calligraphy at different points in history, inks and illumination, and it was a real masterclass, and I was really privileged to have learned as much as I did, and I wish I could learn more.
That sounds really cool. It really was. I remember I was watching some, history show, and they cut to a college campus where a professor was teaching students how to make stone points by napping stone, and I was like, wait a minute, that's a thing you can do? Like,
they have YouTube videos, by the way.
They do, but I was able to get some hand-on instruction and learn how to make stone spear points and things and arrowheads, and I was like, this is awesome. Experimental archaeology, or like hands-on archaeology is so cool to me.
I think so too, and honestly, I think that's it's funny, even doing, a craft in an ancient way or of an ancient form gives you, I think in many ways, a bone-deep understanding of so much more than just the craft. And it kind of sinks into your bones. I don't know how best to put it, but when you're sitting there with a piece of obsidian and a bit of deer antler and you're trying to pressure flake along an edge so that it actually comes out doing what it's supposed to do, you not only gain an appreciation for the skill and the talent, but just the life that went into it and the lives that came out of them.
Well said. It's funny, the appreciation you gain for how hard things are, even if you never really picked up the skill, you at least broaden your understanding of the subject. And when I watch one of those videos and someone gets a really good flake, you hear that clean snap and you're like, yeah, you did it.
Honestly, they should make videos, competitions or whatever, because I understand exactly what you mean, where it just happens to fall along the grain and you hit it at that angle just perfectly. I wish I could have somebody to teach me hands-on, because all I've ever seen are YouTube videos.
The same goes for calligraphy, which is a high wire act. There are no erasers. You see someone twisting this nib and it glides across the paper and it's like a roller coaster. And you're like, oh my God, they're doing it. They're really doing it. And the precision and control and the poise. I literally get my heart in my throat when I see some master doing calligraphy.
It's amazing, and I am definitely not at that level. I've seen some of the videos that you're talking about where they don't pause, it just seems to flow naturally out of their pen, and I'm always amazed and impressed. I know a lot of preparation work goes into like ruling and working with your vellum or your surface ahead of time, so it doesn't do stuff that's weird. But all the same, to me, it's such a painstaking process. I'm always amazed by people who can do it so fluidly.
I studied Japanese calligraphy for a very short amount of time. The most advanced form is the continuous, never pick up the brush. You have to load it up with ink to make sure that you don't run out by the end. And it's this big looping swirl that dances back and forth across the paper. It's all one singular expression. Oh, it's so good.
I'm literally getting chills because I can envision how many hundreds, thousands of hours went into something that looks so effortless.
Yeah, they call it mind on paper. And the idea is that every little thought or doubt or frustration you have sort of is transmitted through the brush and will be picked up. And if you do not achieve Zen, you're not going to be able to do it well, which is why I was terrible.
Yeah, I'm sure that I would be, monkey mind part of me would be chittering away as I was doing this and would ruin everything.
Yeah, the monkey mind is strong. Speaking of the arts, when did you start writing? Because I was looking through your bibliography and it seems like you really hit the ground running.
Well, it's sort of I've been writing for a long time, but in many ways just like life got in the way. And then COVID. Like for everybody. And that was when I had circumstances shifted around a little bit, and I had some actual time to do the, in many ways, solitary and apologetically, I say selfish, because it kind of is, but necessary selfishness to have the time to yourself to craft out a story, which I hadn't had as much prior to that point. And so I put a lot on hold for a while, and so I'm grateful for that time and wouldn't change it, but I'm also grateful for having the space and time to be able to sit down with a story and work it out.
I guess the two related questions would be, why writing and why horror?
Oh, I can't think of a time when I didn't write. I guess maybe when I couldn't because I was too young and I couldn't hold a pencil well. But pretty much after that, one of my earliest memories of writing is literally sitting down during recess with that lined paper that they gave you in grade school when they were teaching you how to write with the, oddly enough, so now we're back to calligraphy, I guess.
Right.
where you're practicing your cursive. And I remember writing basically what we would now call Wizard of Oz fanfic about how I, too, had gone to Oz with my... Honestly, it's always been a part of what I did.
I guess it's a short trip down the yellow brick road from Oz to horror.
It's a very quick trip. I haven't yet seen the movie Return to Oz with Famous of Bulk, but I understand it's terrifying. And I look forward for that reason to seeing it because horror fiction and children's fiction and fairy tales go hand in hand. They're some of the most terrifying things I've read, really.
So let's get into the book. Will you read us a back of the book summary of Words Made of Flesh?
Essentially, the story begins in 1899 with Harrison Quire, who's just sort of a mild-mannered and kind of fearful, self-contained bachelor. And he's on his way to his club, the Whisperers Club, group of gather in a very, very well-stocked old library full of books to hear ghost stories or horror stories. And he's drawn into the tale of the person who's appointed that night to tell the last story of the year. And the more he's drawn into it, the more he becomes a literal part of the story that's being told.
This was such a fun, cozy reading experience, and it coincided with the first time actually, that we turned on our new fireplace. So I was all bundled up with my pets in my reading chair by the fire, and I was like, this is perfect.
That's wonderful.
It is very much in the style of the 1800s. It's beautifully written, but it's also easy and seamless. There's nothing stodgy about the writing. You still prod and shock the reader with interesting turns of phrase that you might not find in like a Dickens novel. There are blocks of text that conform beautifully to a Victorian or an Edwardian ghost story, and then there are little barbs of sentence fragments that you sneak in to stab at the reader like a contemporary horror story. I've never seen that before. It's really impressive.
Thank you. Thank you. I love Dickens. I love the richness of his prose and authors of that period, including, Henry James and Poe and Lovecraft. Lovecraft's a little later, but I talked about cosplay earlier. In many ways, it's sort of linguistic or verbal cosplay, because I am a modern horror writer, and so I love the idea of sort of sentences that sting, because that's exactly how I feel about it. That certain observations or certain realizations need to be brought out of the background in that way to communicate the immediacy or the unadulterated raw truth of what they're understanding.
Nailed it. Well said. You name-checked Lovecraft, and there is a very fun vein of Lovecraftian horror running through this book. There is the obsession with ancient and possibly profane manuscripts, but there's also the deeper background hum of cosmic horror. Sometimes those two things are decoupled, especially nowadays. I think it's more in vogue to jettison Lovecraft and focus just on his idea of cosmic horror. And so I always look a little bit askew at that, because I feel like at its worst, cosmic horror can just be a bunch of squirming tentacles or space squid with no real philosophical menace behind it. But I thought your take on cosmic horror was very, very formidable.
Thank you. In many ways, I think that's sort of, for me anyway, and perhaps not for everybody, for me it's sort of the horror, the foundational horror that Lovecraft was expressing, and certainly, he's in the tradition of other folks feeling this way also, of the fear of what's out there beyond what we can perceive, what we can understand in our reality, and more poignant and soul-crushing cold fear of what if the universe is cold, fundamentally? What if it is malevolent? What if there is nothing beyond this? And we work very, very hard, I think, as human beings, and always have, literally, ever since we were living in actual caves, to preserve ourselves into that nothing through our burial rituals or cave paintings or our, later on, our carved or spoken or written texts, sent forth into the future, hoping that there is one, because we don't know what's beyond here, if anything is. And that lack of knowledge and that fear, I think, is at the baseline of what we all grow to understand. Maybe we understand it earlier than I think we do.
I could imagine a young member of the tribe making a dangerous trip into the black mouth of a cave, and they have to leave a red handprint on the wall that says, "I was here." And sometimes the cave is a mouth and it swallows you, and the trip back is not guaranteed. But the idea of that stretching forward through time in all of the different ways that people record and share knowledge and pass it down to other generations.
I love that idea, especially because, thinking back to ancient humans, there are some literal caves where it's very clear that, like the ones at Chauvet and Lascaux, where it's clear that their purpose was ceremonial. And it doesn't take a lot of imagination to think that they were depicting the womb of the world with all of its created creatures inside there. But, the womb is a pretty black place. And there's pretty much one way out. And maybe it didn't always come out of there. We don't know.
So this is a book about books. Harkening back to our earlier conversation about calligraphy, this could so easily be a very dry and sterile story because it's about books, but it's pretty clear to me that your experience with medieval calligraphy has made this such a visceral story about books.
Well, that's partly because medieval calligraphy is itself visceral. I mean, literally, you're writing on skin, baby calf skin. And I was amused as hell in doing some research for this, that the frame on which you stretch the vellum when it's wet, basically, is just drying, is literally called a hearse. And I thought, oh my God, that is perfect. It's one of those little gems that you don't expect to find, and it's a nugget of gold. And the fleshiness of, especially medieval books, has always been something that's intrigued the hell out of me. And in doing research for this book, I knew I wanted to write about books, like I may have mentioned. And the afterword, and I loved books. I used to work, one of my first jobs was working in a university library. And the physicality of them, the smell of them, the scent of old pages, that lingers especially in the back stacks where the really old things are. All of those things I loved and I wanted to talk about, but I, like you, I didn't want it just to be about, okay, this is a book, because that's really super boring. There have been 1,000,005 books written about, like, oh, we discovered the magic grimoire, and now and I was really at a crossroads until I like I think I said, took my dog for a walk, and I thought, and who, besides that, who the heck would want to read something about books? And I thought, I know who would. You would, I would. Yeah, okay, I get it. And from that point, everything sort of clicked into place.
I was honestly surprised to find out that you were struggling with how to break this story because it is so well balanced. The themes, the slow roll of dread, the mirroring between the characters, the different point of views, the way you slowly introduce new conceits into the book, the twist, which we won't get into for spoiler policy reasons, it almost felt like it came as a piece because it's such a well-written book. But of course, as a craftsman, I should know that's a pretty rare thing.
Yeah, nothing ever falls really into my lap. If anything falls into my lap, and I'm grateful for any lap descents, I think that if I can at least do two things, it's not like it writes itself, but it does become more clear what the pathway is. How's it going to end? Or at least, do I have a vision of the end? Do I have a sense of, sometimes it is a literal image at the end that I'm driving towards. And at least I can keep myself on the right track. And then as I write, things suggest themselves that work out to fit. And at least they're consistent with the ending that I thought of.
Has it found a place in the cosmic horror sort of Lovecraft atmosphere?
I don't think so. I'm not really sure. And I really try not to read reviews because for 5 million reasons, not the least of which is I'm not the audience for them. Mm-hmm. And I kind of don't want to know. I hope people like my work. And if they don't like my work, that's cool because nothing is for everybody.
Right.
But I'd rather not have the specifics lingering in my mind forever. So, but I'm pretty sure it hasn't. And I don't know whether or not, it certainly doesn't exactly market itself as being cosmic horror, partly on purpose, partly because I'm sure that if you're in the market for cosmic horror, this isn't necessarily an automatic go-to because it's sort of tentacle-free.
Yeah, I think you are playing in a space of cosmic horror that I much prefer to tentacles and shotguns. So many people come to it through the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, whereas I came to it through the writing of H.P. Lovecraft. And I bounce off that stuff where it's like, oh, I'm gonna take a stand and fight back against horrors beyond comprehension. I think you're missing the point.
Are you though?
I don't think you can reverse entropy with your plucky little characters.
No, I just don't think bullets are going to take down Cthulhu.
Yeah. Tell us about the cover art for this book.
Oh, isn't it beautiful? It is just lovely. The work that Cemetery Gates did and Luke Spooner of Carrion House, who's the artist, was just wonderful. And they said, what do you want to have the cover look like? And I'm always afraid of saying, oh, anything is fine, because it's like, really, no, anything isn't. And I said I did want it to evoke one of the central images of the work. And I like the fact that the image that Luke Spooner took is different from the one in my head, but and different from the one on the page, but that's okay, because it does evoke that sort of place and time, and is just a lovely piece of work.
What are you working on next?
Oh boy, it's funny that you should have mentioned earlier going into a dark cave and having it be a place of danger, because I've been working for a good amount of time on a story that's set in Colorado during the period of the silver boom, but before the Sherman Silver Purchase Act is repealed. So in that sort of heyday of Colorado mining. And so I've been down a lot of dark holes recently. And they are, in fact, scary. So if you're looking for a place to have some genuine scares, then yeah, I would totally recommend any kind of mining tour.
I love a mining tour. I love a cave tour. I've always been fascinated by the world beneath the world, be it the old subways of New York or Anasazi civilizations or the tunnel city under Turkey, on and on and on. So where can our listeners find you online?
I am Instagram, your usual parade of socials, Blue Sky, Threads, and I have a website and my books are available through Amazon and certainly through Cemetery Gates Media. The one that's just out now in October, You Will Speak for the Dead, is also available through Amazon and also Stellaform Press.
Can you tell us a bit about that one?
Absolutely. Okay, it's very different. And so if you want sort of a really big 180 in terms of style or voices, it's something that you might enjoy. It's set in the modern era. And it's about this guy who cleans hoarder houses for a living. He's got kind of drawn into that as first as a side job and then more as a going commercial enterprise. And his company is hired by this guy who is the brother-in-law of an older biologist. She's kind of in need of more assistance than he can provide, and he's going to be putting her into a retirement home. And needs her house cleaned out so that he can flip it and sell it. As he's inside the house, he starts feeling a weird sense of communion or connection with events and objects that he has essentially no right to know about. And without giving away a whole lot, he finds a connection with the essence of the woman who used to live there and her memories. And so it's very different, Words Made of Flesh. And there are tentacles, although not necessarily the kind you expect, and definitely I'm going to think probably not in the places you would expect. So, spoiler alert, lots of body horror, but it was a wonderful book to write, and I'm very happy it's out.
Awesome. And that just released?
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago in October. It's sort of marketed or branded as eco-horror, which isn't how I necessarily thought of it, but it does in fact fit into that genre pretty well.
Fantastic. Well, R.A., thank you so much for letting me read the book and for answering all my burning questions. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Please subscribe and follow. Links are in the show notes. You can find me at jeffccarter.com and hit the link to pick up my collection, We Bleed Orange and Black, 3-1 fun-sized tales for Halloween. Until next time, stay spooktacular.